welcome everyone to the inaugural X Space hosted by this new venture from Jay Bhattacharya and myself called Science from the Fringe. I am Bryce Nickels. I'm a professor of genetics at Rutgers and co-founder of a nonprofit called Biosafety Now. Today, I will be the voice of this, the Science from the Fringe not podcast. This is an X Space. So I'll be speaking under the Science from the Fringe profile. So joining me as the co-host today is Valentin Brutel, who's an immunologist. And actually, we didn't publicly announce it yet, but he's a new member of the Biosafety Now advisory board. So Valentin, thanks for joining me today as host on this interesting space.
I'm very happy to do so. Hi, everyone.
So Valentin and I are very excited because we're welcoming two special guests. They're both independent journalists from Germany who played a major role in uncovering, I guess what I'm referring to it as the RKI file scandal. This is a major story in Germany that is, part of the continuing erosion of public trust in health authorities. And so definitely very, very excited for this space. So I want to welcome Aya Velázquez, who's an independent journalist and cultural anthropologist. Aya, thank you very much for joining us.
Hello, thank you very much for the invitation.
And you are joined by Bastian Barukar. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I forgot to ask before we did this. You are also a freelance journalist. Thank you very much for joining us today as well. You want to unmute yourself just to make sure. There you go.
Thanks for having me.
Cool. Okay, great. So now I want to go over a couple of the ground rules today because this is, I think the key thing here is that I believe a lot of people in Germany are very, very, following the story closely, but in the US, it's really not very well known. So one of the goals here is to share this story with both, people in the US, but more broadly, the English speaking people that, that would be very interested in this issue. So we want to take some questions today, but as I have found from prior X Spaces, it's really important for me to have some very, very strict ground rules about the questions so that we don't sort of get sidetracked from the topic at hand. So a couple things really important for today is all the questions are going to have to be in English because I need to understand what you're saying so I know that you're not trying to disrupt the space. Want to make sure if you do speak, please stay on topic, keep the questions concise to the point, and make sure you're respectful of others' time in the space. I'm hoping we'll have many people that want to say something and ask questions, so I am going to be pretty strict about limiting speakers to only a few minutes, so make your point very quickly and clearly. I'll reiterate, no trolling, anyone causing disruptions on this, I'm going to remove you immediately as a speaker. I'm not going to play around or be polite at all. So it's incredibly disrespectful for, I've had this happen before. I'm not going to allow this to happen here. Okay, so I want to begin today by asking, I guess, Aya, could you start and just give us some background of this subject? Because I think a lot of people here don't know anything about this. So I want to go into a bit, just very basic background on the subject, and then we can, and Valentin can chime in if you have any questions, and then Bastian as well, you can fill in as well. So Aya, go ahead and unmute yourself and give us a rundown of what this story is all about.
Yeah, thank you. The RKI, to start with, is the German CDC, so to say. So it's Germany's highest health authority for infectious diseases and also non-communicable diseases. And during the corona crisis, this institution had a crucial role because they had a crisis panel, an internal crisis panel, where they decided about the measures to be taken. And these measures were then sent to politics as a recommendation of Germany's highest health authority. So it's a really honorable institution. It was founded by Robert Koch, which is the legendary microbiologist. It had a very great reputation. And nobody really doubted this position. And already since the spring of this year, this image has been shaken a little bit because these documents of the internal crisis panel have been partially acquitted in court by a court trial by a fellow journalist. but what he received was only the material until April 2021, and the material was heavily redacted. And in the next months, a whistleblower came up to me and gave me all the material from 2020 to 2023. All in total, this were 4,000 pages of the internal crisis panel sessions, plus 10 gigabytes of additional material like PowerPoint presentation, papers, email conversations of the RKI, even containing letters of Emmanuel Macron. And since I leaked the entire material, it was possible because the person of the RKI, it is a former RKI employee, could retrieve the material from the archive. And the archive was the only thing in the entire institute which is not tracked. It's not tracked who enters this. So they could not find out who the person is. And I leaked it in July of this summer. And since they were leaked, they kind of caused a big scandal, but at the same time, mainstream media tried to deny that they contain a scandal. So to make it short, the biggest mainstream narratives right now are surrounding these files is the question whether these files contain a scandal or not. So you can group the journalist discourse into these two groups. Group one downplays the scandal and the other group analyzes the scandal. So this is a short version of what the RKI files are about.
So, Bastian, what is your role in the release of the RKI files? How did you get involved?
So I've been busy writing and translating articles around Corona since April or March 2020. And at some point, Aya contacted me and asked me if I was interested in these documents and digging through them, finding out what's really inside of them and what could be important to the public. So I agreed and was happy to do it. Actually, I remember writing several times on X, when will there be a whistleblower? Because it was so obvious that the people in the RKI must know that the politics around the pandemic do not match the scientific evidence. So I was actually happy to hear this. And then I started looking through the documents and had some major issues that I wanted to address, because I've been writing a lot about the role of the children in those Corona measures. So I tried to dig through them, finding evidence concerning children, school closures, and vaccine too. And so I focused on this. And then after the release, I'm writing articles in a rather big daily newspaper, the Berliner Zeitung. And I just pick some things out of the protocols or the documents, and then I try to find what happened in politics at this time, what happened at the RKI, what happened in the media. And so I try to basically publish what's in them, not just the raw quotes, but what was happening at that time. And this is what's still ongoing. And I'm also interviewing law professors and immunologists, and then always asking about the RKI protocols. And then we kind of puzzle it all together this way.
So I have just a couple questions, and then I want Valentin, if you want to chime in here. So just to be clear, we're talking mainly about policies related to school closures or lockdowns and vaccine mandates. Is that where the major issues are in these documents? I don't know if Aya or Bastian, you want to answer that. Is it primarily those issues?
It's primarily everything. So everything that was politically decided in the last years are covered at one point or another in these files. Even the origin question, but only right in the beginning. So
Okay.
not
So
so
we'll
much
get
for
to.
Valentine.
Well, no, I mean the origin thing we could come back to. I think that I know that obviously that's something I've been interested as well as Valentin. But I was wondering, just to sort of frame the discussion, if primarily we're talking about the science here in the file. Well, what the files reveal is that the government wasn't following scientific advice. It was doing something more political Is that the general sense, or is that too simplified?
I think there's more in it, but it's hard to do it in 1 or 2 minutes. So I think what has to be stated again is that the reason why these protocols had been so important is because what Aya just said, that journalists wanted to know why did the government choose to declare a high risk for the public coming from the coronavirus, because that was then the basis for for judges and courts to say, oh, well, these measures are okay because we have a high risk. And so then we figured out that there was never a scientific evidence for this risk assessment. And that was really, really important. And it's still really important. And now the courts are actually changing, or some courts are actually acting now different. And then I think one of the very important things is that we now know, we now have it on paper, that the RKI was never a purely scientific institution, but there is clear evidence that politics and even ministers with their names basically ordering things to happen. For example, saying, no, I do not want the risk to go down for the public, and so it stays up, it stays high, even though the scientists say, well, there's no real reason. So, and why this is important? Because the health minister said, well, the RKI is doing the science, and we are doing politics, and then this is how we work. But it was never that way. At least after some months, it wasn't that way, and the public was basically deceived in thinking, oh, okay, the science is doing their job, and then they're talking to the politicians, and then they're doing their job. But it was never this way, because the politics changed and ordered things straight to the RKI, and the RKI said, well, if we don't do it, then maybe we can't play, maybe we don't have a role in there anymore. So they went along after a while. And so it's really important for the public to understand what was science and what was politics.
Okay, I see. Valentin, did you want to say something?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is the biggest issue, that it was always communicated as if the RKI is providing the independent science, and then the politicians are doing their decisions based on that. And then there's a second really important part here, which is that many politicians made a ton of money with COVID measurements. For example, with mask deals, they ordered masks from, for example, companies in which some of their friends or relatives were involved, and they got huge bonuses and paid lots of money, really high prices on these masks. And it was always communicated as if this is absolutely needed and we need them immediately. So of course, the politicians to some extent benefited from the pandemic. Yeah, maybe we can just go over some of these examples, maybe starting with masks, and then we can move into the issue with the children and go over a few other things, so that the listeners can really make up their own minds and see how this worked. I think
that would make sense. Valentin, I wanted to say, so something like that, do you mind like linking an article or something into the the replies to the space announcement, just so that people can read about that sort of kickback you're mentioning, if people in government in Germany. One other thing I wanted to ask about the release here, or there's two things actually. One, just being in the US, it seems like Germans have been, what I'm hearing is that Germans generally are much more trusting of the government. Is that than the US has been in the wake of the pandemic? And because this is coming as a surprise, it just seems like in the US, we would assume that, of course, that this was what's going on. Is it fair to say that the German citizens' general trust of the government has been much higher than in the US?
So my trust in the government was certainly much higher before this whole pandemic. But during the pandemic, personally, it felt like some of these regulations just didn't make much sense. We had some really, really weird ones, and Aya and Bastian, maybe you can chime in with some of your highlights. For example, I still remember going to a playground with the kids, and then I saw this was all like locked up. You couldn't enter anymore, and they put these gravel on the half pipes so that kids could no longer like skateboard anymore. And just, the recommendations was always don't stay inside and closed rooms, go outside, get sun, get vitamin D, stay active. Yeah, this makes a lot of sense also to remain healthy, of course. And then to locking off the playgrounds just seemed really weird. Another law was that you could eat ice cream, but you had to do that 50 meters away from the ice cream shop, or you had to you're no longer allowed to sit on benches. You could, walk. You could take a short stroll, but you're no longer allowed to sit on a bench, even if you're alone. So a lot of this seemed really arbitrary and really random, and it didn't make much sense. And now we kind of see that a lot of this was not really based on solid science. So one of the questions was, do we need FFP2 masks? Is that beneficial? In my opinion, it can help if you're, for example, infected, or if you're at high risk, a person at risk, if you're really old or have some diseases. But this was at some point mandated for everyone. And then, of course, we know that politicians made a lot of money with buying masks. And then, maybe Ayla or Bastian, you could tell us what was now exposed in your documents about the relevance of the mask and the science behind it.
Aya, did you want to comment on that?
Yes, why not? Children and masks, for example, they had a switch within 2 weeks. In the summer of 2021, they said if the case numbers are below very low, then there's no mask requirement for younger pupils, and it's only optional for the older ones. And within the next 2 weeks, they made a 180-degree switch, and they said medical mouth and nose protection regardless of case numbers. Masks should always be worn as part of the multi-component strategy regardless of case number thresholds. So, okay, no masks for pupils at low case numbers, and then 2 weeks later, every time masks for all pupils. So it's not judged in the or it's not justified in these files why they changed their opinion so quickly. And for the general population, it's almost the same. They said they were against FFP2 masks, and when then politics decided that FFP2 masks, which is in the US N95 masks, are mandatory for the entire population, they did not really speak up. So the basic citizen rights were violated for an entire winter, and the RKI, which had all the knowledge, did not really reject this. And they knew it all the time. They said, for example, in 2020, there is no technical need for the use of FFP2 masks outside of occupational health and safety. This could also be made available to the public. Yeah, could be. It stays in the conditional. They never really made it public because otherwise FP2 masks would not have been mandatory. One example.
I could add something if that's okay.
Please do. Yep, go ahead.
So just a quote that I really liked. It was in the November 2020, and it says it's not practical, and it's even dangerous if people without any training use masks in public. But then they say, but we cannot have any influence on this because it's already been decided. And the RKI has not been asked before. So that's basically the quote. And interestingly, though, there was a evaluation of the measurements that was official, and the documents were also official. And they also said, we don't have any evidence for masks except for some laboratory settings that don't have any value for, the benefits of masks in public. So there was nothing new that masks in public, by everybody or used by everybody, don't have an impact. But basically, they knew that it's even dangerous if people that have no idea how to handle masks, if they carry it and think now they are safe and the others are safe. They knew it from the start, from November 2020, actually.
I want to take a question from Brigitte, I believe. I'm going to unmute Brigitte and take a question. So let's see. All right. Uh-oh. Now, it's possible the connection may take a little, if the connection doesn't work, then you have to access this on your phone. So if you're not on a phone, then please join on a phone because this doesn't look like it's connecting. While I'm waiting for her to potentially connect, I wanted to go back and ask a question about the whistleblower. I guess I wasn't. You said that they were now a former RKA employee. Is that a new information, or I maybe I missed that when I heard you speak with Jay on the podcast you did with him? Is that
No,
new?
it's not a new information. It is
Oh, okay.
information that I already told in the very first post I posted on July 23rd of this year.
Okay.
Yeah, so it is a person that is not working anymore in the institute, but obviously had access.
And they first reached out to you when they were an employee or when they had left?
These are details that I can't talk about because I would,
Ah.
of course, put a danger to the whistleblower person.
That's another question I had. What are the whistleblower protections in Germany? Are there any, or how's that? Like, what is the potential penalty that the whistleblower might face for whatever they provided to you?
You know, there's not really a precedent for this because we have a new whistleblower law, which is called Hinweisgeberschutzgesetz. But I checked the law, of course, before I leaked the material because I wanted to know what is on stake for me. And the problem is that this law only covers when a whistleblower from a company goes to a state institution and says, well, something goes wrong in this company. So it's only for these business cases, like someone wants to tell something about a company that goes wrong. The case that a member of a government agency, a government institution, is whistleblowing and is leaking something is not even covered by this law. And right now, the RKI pretends that this was a crime. They said it in public to the other journalist who appealed for the documents in court. It is some days ago that this new information came out, and they consider it a crime. But it's of no use to call it a crime because they don't know who the whistleblower is. And still, my action is still under some journalist protection. So I did not face a house raid, at least not until now. And if it would happen, it would cause a scandal in Germany for sure.
One other follow-up, and this might be, this is kind of like more of I feel like in America, or at least perhaps the Twitter space for COVID origins is filled with whatever comes out. It's always accused of being some sort of controlled. Well, there's always a element of sort of, people trying to, claim everything as something else. And in terms of something like this, the documents that were released, would these provide like the full coverage of all the discussions that were going on that in that panel or the advisory panel, or is it a selective release? Meaning, the reason I ask, of course, is because if people are selectively releasing things, that's one way. Control of information is power, right? So if some information's out but there's still some hidden, that we need to really get all of it out to have a full picture. So that's kind of what I'm wondering about, if you know about that, because there are always everyone's always accusing people in the US of leaking stuff and not leaking other stuff. And blah,
Limited
blah, blah.
hangout, I guess it's what.
Yeah, people can call it whatever. There's all the psyop and everything. Like everything's a limited hangout. It's very exhausting.
We had these
here.
accusations here as well. For example, some people approached me and said, well, it's maybe from the heads of the RKI that came to you and just wanted to give it out. The problem is that the material is really rich of details, like the emails. There are a lot of information like mobile numbers and information which is kind of, it's not comfortable. This information is out now and it's such an enormous volume, and it's not plausible that the RKI has some advantage of this. I think right now they embrace it. For example, the RKI actual head of RKI kind of used the material in front of a court and said, well, it's not us who decided about the risk assessment. So he kind of fled to the forefront because he knew that the files made his institute now look a little bit better, and he can put the blame on the health ministry again. So RKI kind of sensed that they can use these files now in their advantage, but it was not something they planned or they wanted.
Oh, so initially they were attacking you, but now they've pivoted to saying, aha, we were right, and then we were not listened to? Is that
This is not explicit, but this is what happened lately, because the head of the RKI was invited to the first court case where the files were used in Osnabrück. There was a nurse complaining that she was sent out, or she had a prohibition of entering her facility in the end of 2022. And RKI head Lars Schade was in front of the court as a testimony. And he said, well, the risk assessment was a political management decision anyways. So this is something totally new that nobody had ever heard before. But of course, it was the easiest way to go for him now, because the files are out in the open anyways. It makes no sense to pretend otherwise. So I think it's the actual strategy that they embraced after the files went out.
But there you go, because now you're saying, of course, this then will lead to the conspiratorial mind to say, wow, well, of course, this is a strategy all along to release it and then claim that they were not listened to, blah, blah, blah. But frankly, I will avoid all of that, because I just think it's really useful to have this information out there, the deliberations, so that we can focus on those, what they say about decisions that were made, and how we can maybe think about changing in the future so that we don't repeat mistakes. So I don't know, Valentin, did you have specific scientific pieces of these files that you wanted to delve into other than the masks?
So something relatedly is, I think it just gave us a really good feel for how this worked. There was, for example, in one of the meetings mentioned that Christian Drosten has prepared an article in which he said that the masks are not that useful. No, this is about testing. Yeah, he said.
Valentin, can you explain who Christian Drosten is? Can you actually give some background on that?
So Christian Drosten is the by far most prominent virologist discussing COVID-related matters in Germany. He has been very influential on the origin question to some extent, which is my field. I've been in contact with him a little bit, but it didn't lead anywhere. And he had been in this very first phone conference in which a group of virologists on February 1st discussed how they should communicate the origin question, which then in the end led to the proximal origin article, which is highly misleading. And we know from the internal chats that that the virologists who said in that most cited article of that year, it's certainly a natural virus, behind the scenes in the internal chat said it came from a lab almost certainly, or like 60-40, or I can't explain how nature would lead to that. And those same virologists said about Christian Drosten that he's way too conflicted to address this origin question independently. But I think he gave like 200 podcast interviews here, hundreds of, or like at least 50 articles in newspapers. He was really, really very present and interesting. I mean, this is a virus that has a very suspicious feature, this furin cleavage site inserted, which is a proteolytic activation site. And at that time, Christian Drosten had a grant in which they worked on gain of function research and looked at proteolytic activation of respiratory viruses. So to me, it's completely unclear if he had further involvement in that research. There was a link also between German virologists and Wuhan specifically, the Wuhan Institute of Virology. He had clear conflict of interest. And in these files now, one of the points that I mentioned before, he's just quoted regarding the origin. Christian Drosten says it's a natural, point, full stop. That's it. There's no scientific discussion, and there's no declaration of potential conflicts of interest of his collaborations with the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and, for example, as an editor in one of their latest papers. And here, the example given here is he says that just testing everybody randomly would not be very efficient. They have a different approach in Japan. So where they just, do contact tracing. And then in the RKI files, it says that he decided not to publish that because it would contradict what the government is doing. And I mean, this is just really questionable behavior, in my opinion. Yeah, if the government says, "Look, we have scientists here, and they advise us," and then the scientists say, "Well, if the government think we shouldn't, we should still test everyone, although science says it doesn't make sense," then let's just not publish that because the politicians don't like that. This is, I think, one of the nice insights into how this works.
I have to add something here, of course, because this was also a point of debate in the media discussion about it, because some days later after this session, it was in summer of 2020, an article appeared where he said all these things. So the mainstream media argument was, yeah, well, look, you Schwurblers, the article was published. And he also said in front of the press, he doesn't know how this argument that he didn't want to publish something because it contradicts the government behavior got into the RKI files. He has no clue. But I analyzed the version which is in the RKI files, in the additional material, and compared it to the published version. And what he eradicated were the parts where, for example, singular persons should not be tested anymore. For example, if you were in a piano lesson and then you got an infection afterwards, the piano teacher as a contact person doesn't have to be tested because it's not a cluster, and only the clusters should be examined. And he eradicated all sentences which said that singular persons should not be supervised anymore by the testing system. And I can imagine that by these simple changes in the text, he made it compliant to the government behavior again, because the government wanted to test everybody. So he stepped back from his initial idea of only testing clusters. So this is something that mainstream media did not really analyze because they're lazy to read, I have to admit. And yeah, I found these little changes. So maybe he changed his article to make it fit again.
I'm going to, let me take a quick question here from Anne. I guess it's, Hope. Let's see. Anne, if you're able to ask a question, remember the ground rules, keep it short, keep it in English, and no trolling, or I will remove you. Okay, go ahead, Anne, unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question. Anne, are you there? Gotta love the X spaces. The technical aspect of X spaces is the funnest part. Most enjoyable, I should say. And when you're able to, go ahead and unmute yourself. You can ask a question. I'll give you a few moments. If not, I'll just remove you because maybe you accidentally requested and you didn't want to. I want to go back and, oh, there you go. Nope, yeah, I guess she did that. And Bastian, can you talk about Christian Drosten a little bit more here? Because I think his role here is complicated, and I don't know a lot about the way in which the German public perceives him. I do know his role as a virologist, prominent in, talking about it not being a lab leak and also being a proponent of gain of function work. His role as a public health advisor seems a bit odd, given that he is, I guess, sort of a classically trained virologist, right? What is his background, and why would he have so much impact on directing public health policy in your country?
Well, yeah, that is a really, really good question, and I think needs further research. Maybe I don't know the full answer to that for sure. I mean, he works for the Charité, which is a very big institution in Germany, which is also highly funded by the government. And but to understand his role in different aspects is that he was advocating for school closures And then we had this 180-degree shift in when the ministers of our states basically came together, and everybody was like, school closures, they're not good, but then Christian Drosten said, oh no, I just got this article about influenza, and we should close schools. So then it happened actually twice in Germany. We had the longest, not the longest, but one of the longest school closures in Europe. And so he played a major part in this. Also, he made a study that was statistically wrong about how much viral load children give to others. And then it was highly discussed, and it was wrong, basically. And also talking about the testing, I really wanted to add something, that the mass testing of asymptomatic people was something that the RKI did not recommend at all. And you can see it in their protocols and even in additional material. I wrote an article just about the testing. And then the government, Herr Spahn was his name, who's actually he doesn't have anything to do with health or medicine. He wanted mass testing of asymptomatic people. And then this mass testing led to the figures in mid-March 2020 that were needed so that the RKI president could say, oh, we have a dynamic viral happening going on, or there's something very dynamic going on, because we suddenly have 3,000 cases instead of maybe 700. But nobody told the public that they just tripled the amount of testing that happened. So if you just do a simple calculation, you would have known there was nothing going on there. Basically, nothing happened, but tripling the testing, the amount of tests. That's really important, and that can also now be tracked in the protocols that the RKI was against it. But coming back to Drosten, I think he played a major role in basically doing all this harm to the children. And that needs to be researched more, why he did it. And the question that you asked is really important. Why does he even have a say on masks and vaccines? Because then sometimes he says, oh, well, I shouldn't say anything to vaccines because I'm just a virologist. But he advertised vaccines. You can find him saying anything you want. He will say masks don't work, and then he says masks work, and he can basically say anything. And we don't have a single journalist out there that has an interview with him that just quotes him and says, well, where's here the contradiction? And right now he's on a tour because he wrote a book, or he was asked, he wrote a book with a journalist, basically wanting to keep control over the narrative, what happened. That's what he's doing right now, because he knows now that the public knows all the statements he did, that they contradict each other.
Well, I will say, I guess, yeah, so the Drosten thing is interesting. Now, I guess you did make a pretty charged claim there that what he was doing was causing harm to children. And perhaps, I think what you're suggesting perhaps is that the policies that he advocated for led to harms for children that he wasn't necessarily, thinking. Wouldn't it just be like a difference of policy opinion, which you actually are thinking that he knew that these would cause harm to children and he still went ahead and went with it? I guess there's two different things, like a bad policy advocacy and then really be doing something nefarious, which of course the second one's quite difficult to really show. I don't know if you want to clarify that.
Well, I mean, he recommended things that maybe he didn't know, but I mean, anybody knows that closing schools for children would cause harm. So the benefit must be bigger, in terms of infections than the harm that will happen, because children that have, like, I don't know how to say that, but if you live in a difficult situation at home, if these kids stay at home, they might not get enough food or the good food, or they might, experience abuse or violence. So it was clear that this would happen. But the benefit should have been bigger. But then when you look at the RKI files, in February 2020, a staff member of the RKI comes back from China saying, we have this big study and children are not affected. It's oftentimes mild. They weren't even in a hospital, and they don't give it to people that much or significantly. Then that was February 2020. And then in March, the first school closures came. So what I was saying is that if somebody recommends school closures, he must have known that these will cause harm. And looking in the RKI protocols and files, there was already quite some evidence that there was never ever a reason to close schools from an epidemiological point of view.
I see. I did want to say, Valentin, perhaps you can chime in on this as well. This is, there is this there was this prominent interaction that Drosten had with another scientist, Dr. Roland Danger. I don't actually know about COVID origins, and it led to, I believe, Drosten filing some sort of injunction against Dr. Weisendanger for comments that he made, claiming that Drosten was deliberately spreading lies about the virus emerging from a lab in China. Is there anything in these RKI files, and this I think was unfolding in 2021, maybe 2022, is there anything in the RKI files that actually exonerates Dr. Weisendanger? Is it Danger or Danger? What is it? Valentin, help me out here.
Wiesendanger.
Wiesendanger. Okay. Look, and it is embarrassing because I believe I am German by heritage. It's so embarrassing, but that's fine. Okay. Go ahead. Will you go over that a little bit? Because I was curious about.
Yeah, certainly. So to maybe finish up on the first points, I'm not an epidemiologist. It's really tough for me to judge like how much mask regulations or school closures really do. But there was this great interview of Dr. Bhattacharya and Arya recently. I'll just post it in the comments if someone hasn't heard it yet. I highly recommend that. And yeah, epidemiologists weren't really listened to in Germany either. And we had this very different approach in Sweden. I think this was very interesting. They said that we basically have to isolate the people at high risk, the elderly, the immunocompromised, and we cannot justify putting children into like keeping them at home or threatening their education just for the benefit of others, right? And in the end, there was 0 students in Sweden that died from these how it was communicated here, high risk approach, that they kept the schools open and that they basically trusted their people in behaving correctly and judging when you should distance, when you went to wear a mask, how to still use public transport, cafeterias, and so on. And overall, I think we lost a lot of trust in the government because they just didn't communicate the lack of knowledge that was behind of a lot of these regulations. I mean, even if they'd say, we don't really know, but let's just be on the safe side and let's just, for the next 2 months wear these masks, that would have been a completely different story to me. Regarding Wiesendanger, this had a lot of effect on how scientists communicated afterwards, I think. So there was this article in which an interview actually with a newspaper, in which he said that one example was that scientists ran a disinformation campaign, and the judges said, yeah, that's okay, you can say that there was a lot of disinformation. Another thing was that he said there was just no evidence that would have justified the restriction of saying that this must be a natural virus. And of course, a lot of the virologists later changed their minds. Even Fauci, I think, and the Congress hearing said, well, it could be natural, but we just don't have evidence. But of course, it was declared a conspiracy theory in these first articles in major scientific journals. And to call something a conspiracy theory, you really have to have like rock solid evidence. And this is what Professor Wiesendanger was criticizing, saying that there's just no rock solid evidence at all that would justify calling this a absolutely certain a natural virus or that the lab origin is a conspiracy. And then the judge said, well, there was some evidence it could have come from nature, which is, of course, a completely different story. But in the end, he had to pay several tens of thousands euros in legal fees for this, in my opinion, scientifically correct statement. And that really, I think, silenced a lot of scientists. But this was not really in the RKI files as far as I know. Please correct me if I'm wrong here.
Yeah, what is the stuff on the origin in the RKI files? You said there was a little bit of stuff at the beginning, but nothing that nothing sort of a bombshell, or was it just kind of dismissed and then they moved on to other things? Is that, I don't know if I or Bastian want to comment on that.
I can comment on that. Yeah, it was, in
Yeah.
my eyes, it was a nothing burger because in February 2020, there was a panel presentation that Viktor Korman, which was the colleague that issued the first testing protocol together with Christian Drosten, he gave a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation at the RKI. And there was one PowerPoint slide where there was just one sentence. SARS-CoV-2 has a multi-basic furin cleavage site. So what does it mean? It can mean everything. I mean, this was clear from the beginning. Nobody ever doubted this fact. So I think you read a little bit too much into the files, and there's also a little danger to interpret the files in the manner that you want, because you were dismissed for your theory for such a long time. So I think there lies a certain danger in over-interpreting the files in the way that you want to understand them, and just only this sentence cannot prove anything in any direction.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's just interesting that they, like, one sentence was origin, trust, and says natural. That's it. Like, no discussion and so on. I think it tells us more about how the inner workings in these processes. And this had a lot of implications on the society, on judges who said, well, the independent RKI scientists say we have such and such a threat level, so we can now have these restrictions on your business, on your daily life. And then if you later read that it's all very politically influenced, I think this is the key issue here.
So are the RKI dumb question, as I often tend to do, are the RKI files translated into English and posted somewhere?
Yes, they are. We have a good friend, a data analyst, who has done this, and within a few minutes they are live on our webpage, which is rki-transparenzbericht.de. I will post the link under this space so you can access it. So we have a very freshly translated version. Only the main part, like the minutes of the crisis panel, which is around about 4K pages, and the additional material, the 10 gigabytes, are not translated yet.
Wait, did we just break news here? I didn't even, that wasn't even set
this
up.
Is new. This is totally new for tonight.
Wow.
My friend wanted to upload it a little bit earlier, but he's late. He will make it in the next minutes. I already see there is the button for English download on the page, and it will go live the next minutes.
And you can confirm that we did not set that up. I had no idea. Just because that totally sounded like a setup. I mean, it was
set up because we wanted to have it ready for tonight.
Okay, well, I had no idea. The other thing I'm wondering is, where do you go from here, both of you, in terms of your reporting? What are you planning to do? And I'll ask a follow-up after you tell me this. Bastian, do you want to go first? Because you said you have some articles in the works. I'm wondering what.
Sure. Well, it's, as you can imagine, it's just so much material. And I had just finished an article that is about the question why the government pushed people with natural immunity to be vaccinated again. Because I had an interview, surprisingly, that scientists sat down with me. It's one of the top immunologists in Germany, Dr. Andreas Radbruch. And through this interview, it came to me that it seemed like a crazy idea to push immune people to be vaccinated again and again and again. So that's what's new and will come out. And now what I'm shifting my focus on, that, and I already wrote about this years ago, is basically how was it possible, or like, how did this work if the measurements weren't really that great, and if it was highly experimental? What happened? Then you need people to communicate, and you need psychologists that monitor the acceptance of these measures, if the population goes along with it. So then we have people that are also mentioned in the protocols, that their job was it to see, okay, how do people accept to this? How do they react to this? How can we communicate this? So there's several little passages in the protocols that says, well, we're going to take off the board to measure the side effects, or the severe side effects of the vaccine. But that this will maybe lead to a bad reputation for the RKI. And then they say, we have to communicate this correctly, So what I'm focusing on now is, how do social scientists work behind the curtain, maybe, to make measures or policies acceptable to the population that they would normally not accept, like telling people to not sit down on a bench and to not go to church and to not have their kids in school is something that people would react to, would say, well, of course, that's our right. And it's important to understand, how did it work to manipulate the population in a way that they would even accept those measures, because then they thought, oh, they act for the greater good, and there was this word solidarity, and we all have to stand together. So they use basically values in people that are very archaic and very human, but they have sometimes been maybe misused or abused to make people accept measures that are really against the law and against what's common sense. And that's my next focus for the next weeks, I'd say. And I will keep on having interviews with experts, always asking them about the protocols. I just had a law professor and a medicine statistician, and then they all have to react to these protocols, which makes these interviews very fun, because they have to sometimes admit that the people that were called conspiracy theorists or anti-vaxxers or whatever they were called from April 2020 or March 2020, that they had some reasonable points that can actually be found in those RKR protocols. And I think that's a very important thing too, is that the people that were critical of these measurements, of these measures, that they now can find themselves in these protocols of basically the state epidemiologists. And that kind of corrects the history a little bit too.
Naya, what are you working on in terms of the journalism in the immediate future with respect to this story?
I think I will stay at the corona issue. I could not imagine to be interested in science and medicine topics so deeply for the last years, but I think we have just witnessed a crime. One has to say that. And I think in a scale that I have not experienced in my lifetime before. So it was a break, a civilizational break, kind of. And in Germany, we have a big debate about a corona reappraisal. Also on the political level, there are some committees now starting. I think we get something like the select committee form earlier or later. There's the opposition party right now who made a pledge for the German parliament to accept this. So we will have some kind of a court situation where we will have to talk about the constitutionality of the corona measures altogether, and I will follow up on that, of course. And in Germany, there are other topics which are very critical right now. For example, the erosion of civil rights. For example, we have an secret service, an internal secret service, which is now observing regular citizens. I think in no other country in the world there is such an inner secret service. It's called Verfassungsschutz, and I'm doing some projects on this agency right now. So it doesn't really get boring since the corona years, because I think the crime's still ongoing. It's not sensible in a way that the people are harmed in their rights right now. But to give you an example, this week, a soldier who refused the corona vaccinations went to jail. He went to jail for refusing the COVID vaccine. And our politics is still not ready to just lift these charges. And they should, because now the RKI files are out in the open. Everybody knows that the vaccines had no foreign protection. This was just a myth. And politics is still not ready to give a corona amnesty, which has happened in other countries like Slovenia, Slovakia, for example. Germany is so far behind, and politicians, I think, are feeling shame because they are responsible. So there's still a lot of work to do, and I will keep up on that.
Valentin, you were going to say something?
Yeah, just add maybe a few thoughts. I think this is a very interesting example as well, because the soldier had the infection before and he had recovered, right? So the big question, I think, which is not really scientifically proven or in either way, is if you're like recovered from the disease, and if that is not at least equivalent to having 1 or 2 shots. And at this in this context also, I think another piece was really interesting, because a lot of politicians and then also other people in the public really focused on these unvaccinated people. And traditionally, my feeling was always, well, you get the vaccine to protect yourself and not necessarily to protect others. This was a completely new aspect in this one. Then, of course, the data was shifting, showing that also vaccinated people still can get infected. I remember being banned from Twitter at one point for saying that, even if you're vaccinated, you can still transmit the disease, although there's a Nature paper on that already. The censoring in the media was really, really scary, how fast that happened. Not just now internal emails from, for example, Facebook, where they say, hey, why did we delete everything on COVID origins that suggested it could have come from a lab? And then another guy answers, well, we were told to do so by the Biden administration, but this was a mistake. And just how quickly it went from what felt really stable democracy towards something where you singled out people because of their personal medical decisions. And again, in these files, we learned that the scientists at the RKA knew that the statement, it's a now pandemic of the unvaccinated, was not really valid. And then in the discussions, they asked, should we go to the public? Should we tell them we can't really say it's just a pandemic of the unvaccinated? And then the other guy says, no, the minister said that a couple of times. It's not, it's not something he said wrongly by accident, so we don't say anything. It's just a lot of trust has eroded, I think, into the politics, and this had an afterplay. We had 3 elections now in very small and like states in Germany, and all of the parties that were at the government during the COVID and then after COVID years lost pretty dramatically. And maybe this will now lead to something like an investigation into all of these measures. But yeah, I'm still a bit skeptical.
Well, I was going to say that one of the things that I think it was interesting to me, just observationally, is that you're all very polite, and I also, when interacting with people in Europe, meaning like the 3 of you, very polite, very reserved and precise and careful with the way you're talking about this. I sense that in Europe, and you touched on this a second ago about the censorship and there are more concerns when people say stuff that might be a little bit out of the mainstream, or that they will have serious career harms. Is that versus in the States? Is that an accurate assessment of the landscape in Europe and Germany in particular? Or am I just reading too much into that? See, nobody's talking. See, that's the thing. I knew it. I knew it. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, the last 4 years have shown that you can get in trouble, and you can also get in trouble getting sued if you say the wrong thing, especially people that have been very prominent on television, Herr Drosten and others, have no problem suing other people. I've talked to journalists that don't even mention a certain name anymore on camera because they pretty much know what will follow if they have a critical voice. But on the other hand, there's enough people that are pretty verbal about what has going on, and this is more and more people. And talking about what I've just talked about before, the social scientists, the Ash experiment showed that if just one person speaks up saying, well, I think it's this way, then more and more people say, well, I also think it's this way, and they would have been silent before. So I think there's something happening because what Aya just said, the censorship or the government trying to censor speech and or frame people has been so crazy, that I am basically called sometimes a right extreme or right wing, and I'm, basically the opposite. And people realize that it's completely with no reason. People just call people names, and then so the whole name loses its basically it's valid point. It just thrown out there. And one really important sentence I wanted to get into this conversation, and maybe it's off topic, but because Valentin just talked about the vaccines, one sentence in the protocols really struck me, and it's about vaccines. And to me, taking a vaccine is a personal decision, very personal decision. And in the protocols, it says the political decision has been made. They want to vaccinate as many people as fast as possible. End quote. And that alone, to me, is such a crazy statement, because how would politics know who needs a vaccine? It's very personal, it's very individual. And then through the whole protocols, you can see, for example, with the children, that doctors say, oh, no, with the kids, we should wait. There's no evidence. I think the disease is not that harmful, so maybe there's no vaccines necessary for kids and children. And then regularly you can read, well, but the minister is already planning vaccines for the children before school starts or something. And you have it 3 or 4 times where it's like crazy to read. There's these people without any recommendation from our government or from our scientists, basically. They push for vaccines for children and used all these measures to push people into the vaccine. And that is it has been crazy, I think, for a lot of people. And it's one of the things that also struck me the most. The pressure on people to get vaccinated was insane.
There goes our sponsorship deal from Pfizer that we were working meticulously on cultivating. Oh, terrible. All right, I'm just kidding. It's a joke, as you know, Valentin. I tend to do. I had to. Okay, I wanted to ask the two of you, and actually Valentin and I were talking about this, so communicating this stuff with an English audience. You publish your work, it's published in German, right? And do you have a place where you're putting English translations or translations into other languages? And I'm asking, of course, certainly I think Science from the Fringe, and if anything is relevant, even on Biosafety Now, we do have some places that we could put or direct people to English translations of stuff in this area, because I think it's a critically important, in a way, it's like a nice case study of the way in which the censorship apparatus and the public health apparatus work to message things that's happening in in Germany. It's nice to have that, looking at what's happening in another country, but in order to make it accessible to people in the US, we need to have it in some English form. I don't know if your thoughts on that, or that's for a later discussion. Aya, you said you had the RKI files are about to be released in English, but are your articles also published in English?
Some of them are published in English, but I think you can always use the translation function of the browser. So it's not that necessary. I would just do the same thing, like put it through DeepL. So I think everybody can do it for him or herself. And on X, it's always possible to translate all the links, so all the posts. So I think the world has already shrunk together in the sense that everything is able to be translated.
I'm gonna say something that is very rude about my own, like, the people in my country. We're very lazy. It's very difficult for people to take additional steps to put stuff into, like, so I do think it would something to consider, like having a separate English thing. Plus, and also sometimes the meaning gets lost in those translations, especially when you're talking about subtle nuances about how people have been, how people deceived a reader by changing a word, in actual publications, like we were talking about, I mean, you certainly saw that with COVID origins, but also you're mentioning it with one of the, I think, Drosten papers. So anyway, we can talk about that later, I guess. I agree with you. People should be able to just translate stuff easier. There's also paywalling issues too, but okay. So before I wrap up, I wanted to see, we're going to try, there's 2 questions. I'm going to take 2 questions, no trolling, make sure they're in English, and keep it on point. So here we go. Jazz, go ahead. If you are, and I hope you're accessing this space from a phone, because otherwise you won't be able. Okay, go ahead, Jazz. You have a question, a comment? You can unmute yourself.
I was, may I talk? And you asked me, Jess?
Yeah, go ahead. You're on.
Yeah, I was just listening concerning what Bastian Barukar was saying about the pressure. And I think I would like, and what you told about the translation of this very sad thing about the vaccines. I think the problem is not only in Germany, I think it's worldwide. And as far as I was researching, even in other countries, especially, well, I would say in all countries which belong to the UN or the WHO, or the United Nations, I think it would be very nice if there would be somebody who would put together the researches concerning these vaccines in many different languages, because I think also people in Spain or France, Netherlands, South America, New Zealand, Australia. I think the problem was worldwide. The pressure was worldwide, not only on adults, also on children, and the measures were also the same. So I would like that. It would be very nice if someone, would build up a page, a website, and then people could inform in different languages. This would be my suggestion.
Okay, thank you very much, Jazz. Let's see. I'm gonna now have Kenny. If you're able to speak, go ahead, Kenny. Go ahead, Kenny. Just unmute yourself, and you can say something relevant to the discussion, ask a question, make a short comment.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you at first for having this very crucial topic, talking about the mRNA vaccines.
Well, we're talking about the archive files, the vaccines are, we're talking about the archive files. You want to talk about vaccine? I mean, the vaccines, we're talking about the public messaging of vaccines with respect to mandates, efficacy, blah. This isn't a space about vaccines. So
I got you. Okay, now I would just like to add a comment, because basically I was living for the last 3 years here in Germany, and I'm also, because they were talking about the topic about silencing and getting no kind of acknowledgement from the government or the doctors. So basically I'm a very aggressive adequate for talking about these topics about vaccine and origins. And I think in what you guys said about the RKA files, there's a lot of data out there, a lot of, in the US especially, where we know where this virus is coming from and the origins of what the government has planned and are doing. Especially I'm talking from Fauci, so I think we should all read more about these topics. But I just wanted to let you all know that's my experience in Germany. So I've been very adequate about talking about the rising of cancers of these vaccines. And basically, I've also been severely injured from the Moderna vaccine. And ever since I've been fighting here in Germany, I basically cannot go to any hospital anymore here in Germany. They deny me to go anywhere to get medical assistance.
Kenny, hold on a second. We're not doing the vaccine injury stuff in this space. So we're talking about the RKI files, and I understand there's been a lot of people that have been harmed through the vaccines.
Exactly.
So, but with respect to the vaccines themselves, I'm not like I have not had a space just talking about that issue.
No,
so
I totally,
so
totally agree with that.
so definitely, it's something that is worth, these public health discussions about vaccines, especially in the wake of COVID and the way we handle mandates, very important. It's also very important to look at the way in which, however they're getting approved, there are concerns about emergency use authorization, all that stuff. So, but I'm going to go ahead and remove you because we're not talking about specifically, that topic about, vaccine injuries. I'm going to go to Pierre. Go ahead. Last question or comment. Keep it focused. There you go. Go ahead, Pierre. Go ahead, unmute yourself, and you have a question or comment.
Okay, I'm on. Yes. Thank you very much for the space. It's very informative. Dr. Brutel, I've been following you, Alex Washburn, and everybody on Origin. We have a court case against Pfizer in South Africa, and I would really like to have more information, Aya and Bastian, from the RKI files, which we can probably use. So I'll look forward to working with you on working through these files. That's all I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Let's see.
Maybe can I just add something?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I just posted the English version of our press conference in the space, and I posted an English article I wrote about major topics of the RKI protocols. It's not very new, but there's something in it, so it's so they have some English content to work with.
Okay, perfect. All right, I'll try one more. I'm gonna take one more, and then we're gonna wrap up. I know I said only two, but I'm feeling little. Oh no, they disappeared. Okay, so we don't have any other questions. So I want to just let our panelists wrap up. If you have anything to say, Aya, do you want to say anything to wrap this up, and then we'll sort of a statement. Where do we go from here?
Well, I would encourage the people from other countries to do the same. Like, okay, a leak, you can't really plan that. This is like falling from the sky, but you can appeal for documents, for government documents. I think in most countries you have the FOIA laws right now. So I think people could object their policies by just going to court and asking for these materials to ask for transparency. This is the least what governments can do for the people.
Bastian, do you have some final words?
I'd like to echo that. I've been working with Norway and Sweden, trying to get documents, and then sometimes we find something out about the German RKI in Sweden that the RKI doesn't want to tell us in Germany. So I think it's good if we work together and if we try to get as much documents out to really find out what happened. And I wanted to say thanks for the invitation. It was a great way to discuss these files.
Do you want to promote? I forgot. You should both tell us where they can, people can follow you. I know. Are you both on Substack, YouTube? You want to just mention that where people can subscribe and follow your work? I don't know. Where can people locate you?
Yeah, I got a Substack, and they can find me on X. So just follow my
You're
account,
also-
and I will drop all my new articles and documentaries and what I do there.
But are you funded through the Substack? I just want to encourage people because you're both
Yes.
independent journalists.
Yes,
Please,
I'm totally funded by my readers. Yes.
Yeah. So, and this is really important that in order for people to be able to act independently, that people recognize their contributions through, making monetary donation, because that's that's the only way you're going to get independent journalists that are digging into these, non-mainstream issues. Bastian, do you have the same? You want to tell people where they can find you?
Well, I actually have this funding from Pfizer, so I'm good.
Oh,
No,
you're the controlled op. You're the controlled op for Pfizer. Go ahead. Yes.
so no, I'm the same here. I'm publishing actually all that I'm getting and all that I'm spending, because I'm making these interviews that cost money. And I always tell people, well, this is the money I have for the last 3 months. If you want my work to continue, you have to give some money, and the people are willing to pay. And I can be found on YouTube and on X, and I have my own blog, which is just blog and then my name. It's easy to find. And I appreciate everybody reading, and yeah.
Thank you very much. Valentin, do you want to say anything before I sign off?
I just want to say thank you a lot to Aya and Bastian for the investigative work. I think there was the investigative work by the major news outlets wasn't that impressive during COVID, and really encourage people that to really the main focus here should be to prevent the next pandemic. And for that, we really need to be honest. We need to admit that we all make mistakes, and we need to still try to learn as much as possible out of this one. And it is a real international problem, even if a country like the US now has very strict laws on gain of function, and we in Germany don't have them.
Oh, no, we don't, Valentin. We're trying to fight for that. We're trying to fight for it. We don't. We're going to set the model for the rest of the world, but not if people don't recognize that it's a very active fight right now. That they need to use their voice to tell the U.S. politicians, please, please, please pass. There's a law right now, this Risky Research Review Act, that is the model for how you can really try to stop lab-generated pandemics worldwide. So I would encourage everybody, if they consider gain of function to be an existential threat to humanity, to go, Biosafety Now, we have the petition listed on our Twitter page. You can access this petition, very direct petition, to try to get Chuck Schumer in the US to bring to the Senate floor to vote on that act. I can't stress enough how much of a monumental impact that will have. It seems like a very niche thing, but sometimes it's like these little things matter a lot. So that right now, that bill, it's going to establish an independent review panel for projects that have gain of function on potential pandemic pathogens for the first time ever. Before, it was just the researchers saying, trust us, it'll be fine. But now you could get an independent review, and that would have made the world a difference, because it would have stopped those stupid experiments that were, that led to the pandemic, frankly, in my opinion. Sorry, Valentina. I'm passionate about that. So yes. Did you want?
Absolutely. This would be my closing remark. Really.
I stepped all over your closing. I'm sorry.
We learned from this pandemic that there are no borders, no border walls, nothing that will keep this safe. This virus, Omicron, spread within months around the globe. We know that biologists work on much more lethal viruses like Nipah at the Wuhan Institute of Virology and MERS and so on. Just in your mind, go through a list of everyone who had COVID, and then imagine 50% of them would die. It's really a lot at stake here. So we should really encourage investigative journalism. We should really have more whistleblowers, and try to, in every country on this planet, instill some laws that prevent the next pandemic. And I'd encourage everyone to speak out if he or she is aware of any documents such as this that expose things that are not going well and that could lead to future risks. Thanks a lot for doing what you do, Aya, Bastian, and of course, everyone else involved here, like biosafety. It's really impressive what you achieved already.
Thanks, Valentin. I'm going to try to end on an upbeat note. We're making progress. I would say that this conversation shows the progress that's being made, where more and more we're getting documents that reveal what kinds of, the process and procedures that led to public health decisions and where that went wrong, where we can improve. As I just mentioned, with respect to the biosafety component of this, I would encourage everybody to take a look at Biosafety Now. You could just go to the Twitter page right now. There's links to this petition. It seems like a minor thing, but it's the front line of stopping lab-generated pandemics right now. The bill in the U.S. that's making its way, hopefully we want to get it a vote in the Senate, and it won't happen without public pressure. So it doesn't matter where you live. Please go sign it, share it with everybody. You can read what the petition is about, what the law is about, why it matters. I can't stress enough that that is the front line in stopping the next lab-generated pandemic. You can also follow this Science from the Fringe. It's a side project of myself and Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. Obviously, follow us here on Twitter. We have a Substack page as well. We have a YouTube. We're trying to build this up so that we can talk about all kinds of issues. Before this, I'd been focused on obviously doing COVID origins and biosafety. So with that, I'm going to sign off. Thanks to all the three guests. Well, actually, one co-host and our two guests. I appreciate what you all are doing and look forward to reading the stuff that's coming out very soon.
One closing remark is
Yes,
the
go
English
ahead. Yes.
material is live now. So I posted.
Okay, so where can they find that? Did you want to?
I posted it under the space, so they can just find it there. It's our page where the leak happened. So just one more tab for downloading was added right now. So you can download 4K pages in English right now.
Thanks a lot. That's great. And like I said before, that was not a setup. It was not a setup. I had no idea it was going to happen, but we did break news here, which is what I love. Okay. Anyway, thanks everyone. Have a good remainder of your Sunday, and we'll be back at some point in the future with another Science from the Fringe X Space. Take care.